Hi, and welcome to Ladies of Another View. I'm back, and I'm joined today with Jan, Mary, and Lori's going to join us later. And Mary made a heroic ride into back today because it is day 3 of a major blizzard.
Yeah, we had about, I don't know, I don't know how much snow we've actually had because it's anywhere from 5 feet in one place to like you can see bare dirt on the other because of the 40 and 50 mile an hour winds. But it was treacherous getting in. It was like zero visibility and sheer ice and blowing snow. But you know, the show must go on, and it just we have too much to share to sit at home.
Well, that's what we're told, that we were all going to make it in, and we did, by golly, because we would get rides if in. The CEO,
said,
we'll come
he'd
and
give
pick
us
you
a
up."
ride.
Yeah,
Wherever you are, I'll come get you. Now that's a company
show
to
must
work
go
for.
on.
But we have a lot to talk about today, so we did want to come in because we're going to talk later about the mask mandates that won't go away, and also that the governor of Texas is saying, hey, you want to keep sending illegals here? I'm going to send them to Washington, D.C. We're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to have some great snow pictures and videos from us at the end of the show. But first, we're going to talk about that Fufeng plant going planned for Grand Forks, North Dakota. And we have somebody that we've talked to before, Ross Kennedy. He is the, first let me welcome him to the show. Welcome, Ross.
Hello, ladies, how are you?
Great, Ross,
Great,
welcome
thanks
back.
for coming.
Thanks for coming. We got so many good comments when you were on before with the mayor of Grand Forks, talking about the plan to bring in this corn processing plant by a Chinese-owned company. And there's a lot of people very concerned, and they pit farmers and the National Grain Growers Association against what Ross Kennedy has to say, because you're an expert in this kind of thing. What is your background?
So I started my career working for a company called Archer Daniels Midland, most famous as a corn processor, soybean processor, although they're quite integrated in a number of different food, feed ingredients, industrial chemicals, all sorts of things all over the world. Spent about a year there and have ever since really been engaged in the international transportation, sales, marketing of grains, energy products, defense material, do a lot of humanitarian goods and shipping as well for USAID and others. So fairly broad background and experience in terms of interacting with various countries, foreign regimes, and how things that we do here in the United States from a commercial side, from a government side, can really influence that. And here in the last couple of years, I've pivoted somewhat to trying to help people understand some of the lessons that I've learned on the international side about how the world is really changing, and things that we took for granted 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 to 20 years ago about our allies, about maybe countries that have become adversaries, the changing way in which commerce and national security and geopolitical sort of factors all kind of are very intertwined now in a more direct way than they used to be, and trying to help people understand that these assumptions that we've made before, when we had a very stable world, sort of this post World War II, this Pax Americana, we're not in that age anymore. And so old ways of doing things, are now being manipulated or changing. And in some cases, those are being used against the United States. So I founded Fortis Analysis as a strategic consulting company to really help the United States government, as well as various private sector stakeholders, begin to understand the risks and the opportunities associated with kind of this whole brave new world that we seem to be living in.
Okay, Ross, before we go any further, because we have a stack of questions to ask you, let's just first clear up. A lot of people are making allegations that you're working for a competitor and that's why you're against it. Let's just clear that up right away.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm very upfront and haven't been shy about saying that I've got a background in the agribusiness industry. And I can understand where, initially I think a couple of city council members said, when people would send them things that I'd written or segments I'd done or podcasts, whatever it may be, and say, hey, listen to what this guy said. First, it was Koch Industries, right? The Koch brothers that were kind of behind this nefarious plot. And now it seems to be that the accusations are that I'm a hired gun for ADM, which is a pretty crazy thing to say. It certainly betrays a lack of awareness of how the amino acid corn processing animal feed sector works. So I do have numerous stakeholders. I have numerous clients and companies that I work with. Some of them are in the agribusiness sector. None of them, for confidentiality reasons, of course, I can't reveal a lot of them certainly publicly. But I can say unequivocally, I do not work for a competitor of Fufeng. I do not work for ADM in any capacity and have zero connection to that company in any way. This is really truly where sometimes you see a thing that's just, it's so obvious. And to me, it's obvious because it's really the synthesis of all of these very unusual experiences and roles I've had in my life and opportunities I've had to learn. And so for me, this was a lot of things coming together at once that were worlds that I knew, that I understood. And when I realized what I sensed was going on and really started to dive into the data, it was pretty clear to me that whether I work for ADM or not, whatever the beneficial interest is that any company would or wouldn't gain from this, this sort of thing should not happen on its own merits, not because it benefits another company commercially.
So part of your group name is analysis. So there's
Yes.
got to be other places outside of your group itself that you've gained information from. Are there others outside your sphere that have the same concerns that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question, right? This isn't just me, some stranger in a black hat riding in from out of town to cause problems. From the Grand Forks side, Grand Forks in particular has been a target for a long time of Chinese Communist Party and People's Liberation Army influence operations. Um, it's really revealing to me that one of the main talking points in favor of the Fufeng plant that's used by city officials or other farmers or economic development officials is that, well, we've had Chinese companies here for years. We've had students and Chinese cultural institutes like the Confucius Institutes at UND, and we haven't had any issues. And to me, that says, well, if you don't go looking for issues, you're not going to have them. You're not going to find them, right? So it's not a point in the city's favor to make the argument, well, the interests here are so deeply entrenched that we're going to argue in favor of them and disregard the merits or demerits of a specific deal related to China. On the national side, and that's really where a lot of this pressure is coming from, that's where a lot of stakeholders are from my side, is I've had personal conversations with very influential high-level people in the Department of Defense, Department of Commerce, various private sector individuals that are former government officials who are experts in this. They're experts in CFIUS. They're experts in Chinese influence operations in the U.S. They're experts in sort of this amalgam of commercial and public sector, influence and commercial operations. So when I showed any of this data to them, the first thing out of their mouth is, and I won't use maybe some of the more colorful words, but it was, what on earth is going on in Grand Forks that they even think this is a good idea? And that's a question that sort of begs an answer. But at the same time, it's to people who have been doing this for a long time, to people who are very well versed in the background of all of these types of operations in the U.S. and how they're accelerating in the last decade. This, before even knowing the details of it, was pretty suspicious to an awful lot of people, at least outside of the city of Grand Forks, but also at Grand Forks Air Force Base itself.
You know a lot of what has gone on before with Chinese-owned companies, right? That should be warnings to us.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few examples, right? One is, again, it's Cirrus Aircraft is one that kind of continues to come up. In 2011, Cirrus, which is a major manufacturer, very important and really one of sort of the ribbons on the chest of the city as far as being an incubator for aviation and aerospace innovation, which the university is very big into, has a very large international presence, including with China in that. But a lot of that kind of began with Cirrus being purchased in 2011 by a Chinese company. And that Chinese company is a subsidiary of AVIC, AVIC, which is one of the most heavily sanctioned companies by the United States in all of China. It's essentially the Lockheed Martin or Raytheon of China, deeply, deeply, deeply integrated as a state-owned enterprise at all levels of the CCP and the PLA. And that is the parent company of the subsidiary company that owns Cirrus Aircraft. For 10 years, 11 years now, that's been right there in Grand Forks. And a big reason that Chinese companies want to purchase existing companies, and it's one of the reasons we've really reinforced FIRMA, FIRRMA, which is the governing act in charge of CFIUS, Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. One of the reasons we've really beefed up the provisions about purchase of existing companies is because the number one reason, and a lot of times they don't make sense financially or economically, but the number one reason that a Chinese company will come in and purchase an American company in a critical technology sector like aviation is they want access to the intellectual property, the technical data packages, and in some cases, those companies are component or complete system manufacturers for the Department of Defense. And China they purchase it, and legally they have the ability to transfer that property right back over to China. So we've really beefed that up. The Cirrus acquisition was a very famous example of one that the DoD and Treasury and Commerce were quite upset with. And it still continues to be a bit of a security risk today. As far as greenfield projects, another interesting one that the more I dig into that, the more it really blows my mind is the Northern Plains Nitrogen Project. That was supposed to be in 2013, I believe that was announced. It's on the northwest side of Grand Forks. If you look at the sort of the remnants of the website that are still up today, the promises were that this is going to drive the need to upgrade the water infrastructure. It's going to drive the need to increase natural gas delivery capacity to the city, that it's going to lead to other infrastructure improvements. So essentially the same, it's going to add jobs, essentially the same economic development arguments that were made in 2013 and 2014 at the outset of the Northern Plains Nitrogen Project. All of that's being recycled now for the Fufeng project. I mean, right down to identical talking points. The reason that project didn't get maybe as much play nationally and internationally as this Fufeng one is that the Chinese presence in that deal was a little bit more obscure. So there was a company, it was Chengda Chemical Engineering, I believe was the name of the firm, that came to the table, and right away the project was announced in 2013, and then not too long after that, the press releases started coming out that this Chinese firm was going to come in and be part of the engineering, the infrastructure design, and as the rumor is at least that they were a major funding source for that. As laws, and that was brought to the table by Admiral Bill Owens, who is a big name right there in Bismarck. He was vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the 90s under Clinton, a highly decorated, admiral from the Navy. But in his post-military career, really going back to when he retired, I believe it was in 96, he has made an entire career for the last, however many years it's been, connecting high-level Chinese Communist Party officials, and especially their military counterparts in the PLA, to military and government officials in the U.S. The most notorious is the Sanya Institute, or the Sanya Initiative, which has been warned about numerous times by the U.S. government as a major foreign influence mechanism into the U.S. And so this is an individual who, through his contacts, he brings this Chinese company to the table and says, okay, well, now we're going to be making all of this nitrogen fertilizer right here in Grand Forks. And of course, all of that was obscured, in terms of selling the benefits economically to the community. That project is currently mothballed. They say they're still looking for investors. It's really kind of hard to know what, a lot of the city officials are thinking about it. But back in December, Todd Phelan, who's the city administrator for Grand Forks, he's, it's fair to say, I think he's been a champion for the Fufeng project. What's interesting is he connected the two projects. He connected the Fufeng project to the Northern Plains Nitrogen project and said, look, the Northern Plains Nitrogen, facility is going to need an awful lot of gray water, wastewater that can be fed from the city into its own manufacturing processes. And gosh, this Fufeng plant is going to generate a substantial amount of wastewater and runoff that can go in and essentially subsidize some of the operational resources that are required for Northern Plains Nitrogen. So it's clear that at least Todd Phelan, if not other city officials, have connected these two projects in their head and said, let's get this Fufeng project. It's a $350, $500 million project. Let's get that over the finish line, and then go take another bite at the apple in this $2 billion nitrogen plant, and utilize the infrastructure that the Fufeng project brings to the table to justify being able to build the nitrogen project. So It's not just that the city officials seem to want to bring the Fufeng plant there on its own merits. I think it's fair to say that they see that as a phase one or step one into expanding the economic development of the community more by bringing in, at least what one time was a project that had significant Chinese influence as well. So again, just like with Cirrus, just like with all of the Chinese pilot training program that UND's been running for a long time, it's all of these things begin to add up and create a pattern of a city that at some level is very comfortable with and maybe even reliant on in some ways foreign direct investment that comes in from overseas, in particular from China. And that's certainly a hand that they don't want to bite.
Well, you have to kind of wonder a little bit when you have a 5-to-1 vote to approve this agreement, and you have them saying that they're approving it kind of like the federal government did when they said we're going to pass a health care bill to see what's in it. They're kind of doing the same thing, saying we want it to shake out after we've approved it. What kind of questions do you think that they're going to try to answer with that?
Well, I don't think you can answer much with it. The city officials have said, hey, we've been very transparent. Here's all the costs. Here's all the things that are associated with it. But at the end of the day, the one question nobody can seem to answer is why this company, why this project right now, and really what the genesis of this project is, and what it could mean to the city. Nobody in the city side wants to talk about the downside. They don't want to talk about why Grand Forks and why this is this part of this ongoing pattern of foreign investment and influence in their city. And the answer, I think, is pretty straightforward, that it ties back to Grand Forks Air Force Base, at least a significant amount of it. And that's a pattern that we've seen around the country.
I want to get back into the Air Force Base. Is this a risk if a Chinese-owned company sets up shop in Grand Forks?
Yeah, it's absolutely a risk. And a lot of the talk of trying to dismiss things that I've said about that, things that other people have said about it comes from the fact that they feel like, well, Grand Forks Air Force Base hasn't loudly and openly come out and pushed back against it. You haven't seen the Pentagon come in and just start raising Cain about it at city council meetings. And the big reason for that is that's not how this process works. We have this just Byzantine structure of deal review, of processes and procedures that are followed not only in the military but also in the civilian governance sector, excuse me. And so just because someone hasn't said anything yet, that does not mean that there's not very significant concerns, and B, an awful lot of activity happening as quickly as possible behind the scenes within the Air Force itself, but also at the larger Pentagon level and at the congressional level. I know for a fact that numerous senators who are very key in the armed forces side, key on the intelligence side, they are aware of this. And so these processes are in place. It's, I guess, the admonition here or the caution is to anybody who thinks that just because nothing's been said yet, A, it doesn't mean there's not a risk, and B, that certainly things aren't going to be coming down the line in subsequent weeks or months or years that really, I think, reveal this to be more of a risk than it was. To Grand Forks Air Force Base itself, the timing is really convenient. The announcement was made in early November of 2021 that Grand Forks was chosen by Fufeng, that they had down selected from these other communities. And it was only about a month and a half before that the city and Senator Hoeven and Senator Kramer and there was just this huge big to-do at the base about how not only is the base not slated for closure anymore, which I know had been a concern for a few years for the city, but its mission set was expanding. And in conjunction with Cavalier Space Force Station, which is north of Grand Forks a little ways, you're talking about two bases and installations that work very closely in numerous ways. And one way in which it's very, very concerning is the nature of how data is transmitted between not only our bases, but globally. And the nature of signals intelligence or electronics intelligence, what's called ELINT. The technology has advanced so far, so fast that what once you needed 10 years ago, 20 years ago, very large, very sophisticated, incredibly expensive very obvious, in short, very obvious technology to trap or create disruption of digital signals. That's been miniaturized down to a point now where it's very, very unobtrusive. Something could be mounted to the roof of a building that looks like a satellite dish for DirecTV or Dish Network for internet signal, and in fact, it could have a completely different purpose. So this is something where um, just out of hand dismissing that there is a very real threat of a facility that has infrastructure that's got clear line of sight to a base, and to a base that is expanding its role in a lot of ways, both from a space standpoint, but also from a terrestrial and aerospace standpoint here. Grand Forks Air Force Base is not just some small base in the grand scheme of things. It is a important base, and it's expanding and increasing in importance to the greater armed forces, as well as to our international allies and allied military. So it's curious to me that the down selection process happens so rapidly. It's a year and a half of site selection, of the wining and dining of all these cities and officials for Fufeng, and the announcements made in the later part of the year, and then a month and a half after that, boom, we're gonna build in Grand Forks. So that to me is very curious. It's also very curious to people that work at Grand Forks Air Force Base and inside the Pentagon, the timing of these things, and the manner in which these coincidences all start stacking up. At some point, coincidences become data points that I think point to a much larger picture.
Okay, so something that always surprises me is, we're here on this kind of local level. People are making decisions way up, pay grades way above us. Why don't they see it? Why does it take someone like us to point things out that, hey, this could be dangerous? Don't we have government officials watching out for us? That's kind of part one of my question. And part two of it is, can we go ahead and buy land in China and start businesses in China, or do they allow Americans to build on their land or not?
Well, I mean, I'll answer your questions in reverse order. To the second question, no, an American citizen cannot come into China and acquire land, not anywhere in China. You have to create a special purpose vehicle. So you have an American company that partners up with a Chinese company that is approved and chosen by government officials in China. And then those two entities form a joint venture that the Chinese side has the majority control of in China. That joint venture can, if not own property, the CCP's version of ownership, I guess, which is like a long-term lease on the land, but the people don't own the land. The state owns the land under a communist system. There's not really private property there. It's either companies that are under control of the government or the government itself that controls the land, and then you're allowed to use it or build on it and put capital investment into it. And you certainly wouldn't be able to do anything like that anywhere near their military installations. They keep an extremely wide buffer around the vast majority of those. Here in the US, that risk of foreign direct investment, of coming in and purchasing farmland, purchasing commercial real estate, doing what's called a greenfield project, which is kind of building from the dirt itself, or picking a project up halfway, whatever that is, it's much easier to do that here in the United States. And to the second question about why aren't the officials, or are they watching out for us, or why aren't they if they're not? China has made for about 40 years a real hallmark of their policies is what's called elite capture, and that is by economic interests, by ideological interests, by cultural exchange programs, educating people that are in college, Americans in college, that in these Confucius Institutes. That's a famous version of these cultural exchange or cultural influence programs. The United Front Work Department is one of the largest departments in the entire Chinese Communist Party. They have a multi-billion-dollar budget, and the entire thing is about influencing and capturing the elites of the United States and other countries, and really almost brainwashing them in a sense that China's not a threat, that China is good. The peaceful rise of China that's all it is, and that China means it's no harm, and to be able to say that that's true anybody who says that willingly is either completely compromised or so blinded that they probably shouldn't be trusted to be in any position of leadership.
So for decades, we have released all of our manufacturing to find it cheaper in places like China. And do you think that they are now holding that as the carrot?
Absolutely. It's a very common tactic, in fact, of the Chinese government or Chinese Communist Party, rather to pressure and influence companies that are doing business in the U.S. and to say that uh, you are not a friend to China anymore, and so that threatens the economic relationship between the two countries and between these companies. And so the really it's the choice is you either take the carrot of the dollar bill or you take the stick, which is disengagement of China from you or from your state or from your city. And we're going to take that money away, and good luck finding somebody else that's going to step in and allegedly create those jobs or put those dollars into the community. It's a very quid pro quo type of relationship.
Well, we're not done talking about this, but we are for today anyways. But thank you for coming, Ross. I know we'll be in touch and continue to cover this topic.
Yeah, thanks for everything that you brought with. And for our viewers, it's like, wake everybody up. Just wake up.
Appreciate it.
Oh,
Right.
there's more meat on the bone. So I really appreciate the opportunity, and God bless all of you.